This episode of New Politics was released on the 13th of September, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wongal and Gadigal people.
Hello to our audience and hello to you, David. Hope you've had a very good week.
Thanks, Eddie. I have. Hello, everyone. It's been a week of massive development around the world. We should probably pause to acknowledge the death of Charlie Kirk, a man who neither of us agreed with, nor probably particularly liked, but it's a terrible thing that happened, and we might finally get to see a change in the debate over gun regulations in the United States, although I don't think so.
And we've got another big episode coming up, David. We look at all the China bashing that's still going on in Australia, the breakup of the Liberal Party. It looks like it might be finally happening. Who really owns the beaches of Bondi? Lachlan Murdoch takes over News Corporation, and a treaty for the state of Victoria. And we'll be discussing all of these issues pretty soon in this action-packed episode of New Politics.
And I can't wait.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
The leaders of China, Russia and North Korea have made their first public appearance together at a big military parade in Beijing.
Xi Jinping flaunting the newest arsenal in his war kit. His burgeoning army firing a warning shot to the rest of the world.
中华民族是不畏强暴、自立自强的伟大民族。
This week marked 80 years since the defeat of fascism in World War II, and that was commemorated in China. But instead of genuine reflection, Australia's mainstream media found just another excuse to start attacking China. In his speech at the commemorations in Beijing, President Xi Jinping said, "China is a great nation that does not commit violence," but Western media outlets translated this as China does not fear violence. Now, this is a very subtle shift, but this was used to change the meaning of the commemorations for the end of fascism, to shift everything around into sensationalist headlines that China is threatening global peace, it's ready to invade Taiwan and maybe even invade the rest of the world. And this isn't really a new strategy for the media, David. For decades, conservatives and the mainstream media commentators have framed China as the enemy, irrespective of what the context might be. And it just ends up being the same pattern. It's exaggeration, it's a mistranslation here and there. And for me, it just represents total paranoia within the Australian community. But what this really reveals is Australia's own insecurity, a political and media culture that still struggles to treat China with maturity or even basic fairness on the international stage, and even a little bit of respect. And instead of a serious debate about diplomacy and trade, we just end up getting this recycled Cold War rhetoric dressed up as breaking and sensationalist news. It's just this endless scare campaign that never seems to end in Australia.
Chinese criticism, of course, we're allowed to criticise a foreign government and their foreign policies. The anti-Chinese rhetoric, though, does seem to have a little bit of, these people don't deserve to be here. Yeah, I'm not racist, but the Chinese aren't really suited to global domination in the way that the good old Anglo-based and European-based Americans were, or Europe was, or Britain was. Now, no one will ever come out and say that directly, but I'm pretty sure that you hear this level of opprobrium about China and not about America, who has a far less stable genius at its helm at the moment. And even with good presidents, always has problematic foreign policy. Obama bombs Africa. Bush, we know the story of Bush. We know the story of Biden, who sent troops into various parts of the world and who facilitated genocide. Xi says China doesn't commit violence. Now, we can argue that. The people of Tibet might suggest differently, for example. But certainly China isn't as outwardly aggressive as the United States or Britain or Europe can be. Their approach tends to be a bit subtler. They've had, 80 years to invade Taiwan? Haven't yet. Now, I know that there's a lot of complex reasons, including the threat of American retaliation being a major one. But you'd think that they'd have thought of a way of being able to do it over the last 80 years. They're clearly happier with it there than they are with not being there, or they'd have worked out a long time ago how to get it. Yet Tibet does remain a problem. The Falun Gong people will argue too that China has inflicted violence on them. The Murdoch press, and Murdoch may have a personal vendetta in here. There are those who argue, I don't necessarily think this is right, but that his disastrous marriage to Wendy Deng has soured him on China, and that may be a part of it. I think it's more a part of keeping the core audience on side. Oh, look at these Chinese. The restaurants are okay, but we can't trust the rest of it. And so Dan Andrews turning up, amongst many other people, fed right into the ridiculousness of Dan Andrews somehow being a Chinese agent and somehow being Premier of Victoria. And hello to our Victorian people. It's a great state, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure that China is interested in the construction of a cross-city Melbourne freeway, except maybe to get the contract.
Well, the thing is that it ended up being a double bonus for the media. Not only did they have China to rail against and ramp up, but they also had Daniel Andrews to rail against as well. And if you're an editor of a conservative news outlet, well, this is the day that you hit pay dirt, because it's China that you can attack, and then you can go for Daniel Andrews at the same time and then fluctuate between the two. That's your day of work all completed. And just putting aside Daniel Andrews' support for Israel, his support for Zionism and support for the genocide, now, as hard as that might be, we'll just put that aside for the time being. And you'd actually think that that would be a reason for conservatives to actually support Daniel Andrews, because they're all supporting Israel as well, going off on all these junkets and propaganda tours to Israel. But we'll just put that aside. But aside from that, Daniel Andrews is the one who survived the media onslaught against him. He won 3 elections, despite all the trash that the media threw at him, especially in the final 2 elections that he ran in 2018 and 2022. And that's why the media hates him so much.
Did you know he had a car accident about 300 years ago and a kid was knocked off his bike?
Yes, that's right. And we still need to hear about that
That's
300
right.
years later. Of course we do. But not only could the media show him in a photograph with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, but they framed Daniel Andrews as being guilty through this association. You know, that thing that we told you about Dictator Dan? We told you so. Here he is with all these other dictators as well. And what these media reports failed to mention, David, was that at these commemorations were also former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr, also former Prime Ministers of New Zealand, John Key and Helen Clark, and they're on either side of politics from New Zealand. And they also forgot to mention that Tony Abbott was the one who actually invited Xi Jinping to Australia in 2014. Lots of photos to prove that. There's also lots of photos of Malcolm Turnbull with Xi Jinping. There's also lots of photos of Tony Abbott and Vladimir Putin holding koala bears. And this is after Russia annexed Crimea and started its war with Ukraine. So that started in 2014. The invasion started in 2022, but the actual war with Ukraine started in 2014. There's also photos of Malcolm Turnbull with Vladimir Putin. So they would have known exactly what Russia was getting up to at that time. They would have known about China as well. But there's no message about Dictator Tony or Dictator Malcolm. But despite all of this, the focus is all on Daniel Andrews, Dictator Dan. And the mainstream media is just never, ever, ever going to forgive Daniel Andrews for totally running rings around them for many, many years. They had the Get Dan strategy for many years, and even now they still cannot get him.
There's that meme that goes around from time to time with Dan Andrews in front of the Great Wall of China or something with a mobile phone to his ear, and then people put on the commands, make sure that Suzanne Ley gets rolled, or it shows the level of immaturity that people thought that Dan Andrews had this level of influence. Again, you're right, we should be calling him out on his support for genocide. We should be calling him out on his uncritical support of Israel. Instead, we find ourselves having to defend him going to a thing that many other world and ex-world leaders and prominent political figures were going to. We live in a world that's built upside down. And I don't know how they feel they're going to make a worthwhile legacy from this. We oppose China, and when China is the only superpower in 15 years' time, are they going to pretend that this never happened? Probably yes. But is it a worthwhile thing to pursue? Probably not.
Oh, but I think at the end of the day, constructive engagement with China is in Australia's national interest. There's trade, there's jobs. China is still the largest trading partner for Australia, certainly the biggest trading partner for the state of Victoria. Daniel Andrews would know that, and I don't know where he'd be now, whether he's still in Beijing or Shanghai, or maybe getting a stash of Szechuan pepper from somewhere in China. But Daniel Andrews is advancing Australia's interests in China. And I'm sure that he's advancing his own interests as well. There's no question about that. He worked as a consultant for Fortescue Metals as well. The mainstream media should actually be thanking this guy, but I'm sure that China just puts aside all of this stupidity from the media and conservative interests in Australia. Probably has a good laugh about that too. But Australia, we have to remember that Australia is an advanced economy. Unlike the media, which is quite backward, but Australia is an advanced economy. It's got a strong economy despite some of the turbulence that it's had in recent years. But keeping it as a strong economy depends on having a strong economic relationship and good trade relationships with China. But we keep getting this paranoia about China. We should have thanked China for its part in defeating fascism during the Second World War. We should have sent a strong Australian delegation over there to also commemorate this. But all the media and all the conservatives try to do over here is try and ignore China and try and humiliate it just for a few cheap racist and political points.
It's insane. Again, we can criticize and we can hold to account, and we can do it as adults. We don't have to be such all or nothing about it. And the things they criticize China on can equally be applied to the United States, to Europe, to some of their favorite South American countries. Not the ones that they don't like Venezuela, for example, or Brazil at the moment. But Argentina does similar things. Again, we say this every week. We have a very immature and underdeveloped media who refuse to look at subtlety, who refuse to look at nuance, who refuse to look at the national interest in ways that make sense. This is not to say we accept everything every government and every opposition does, by no means. But we should look at them through the eyes of adults, and then we can say what they're doing is childish or not well done or correct or as good an approach as any, or whatever the conclusion might be.
Oh, just on that point of the defeat of fascism 80 years ago, in 1945, I think we just have to look at who the real fascists are in this case. Seven West Media, they were the ones who led this chorus against China, and Daniel Andrews, and this was all followed up by News Corporation, the ABC. But Seven West Media, they consistently run stories against China. And Kerry Stokes as well. They support war criminals in that case where they supported Ben Roberts-Smith. They funded his case to the tune of $15 million. I've forgotten what it was, but they promote far-right agendas, had Pauline Hanson as a regular guest on morning television. And we have this situation where China is on the world stage presenting itself as a partner for peace and global cooperation. And I don't want to keep sounding like a China fanboy or anything like that, but aside from the issues that China does have in the background, that's what it was trying to do at this commemoration in Beijing. Most of the Western world doesn't want to believe that. But then we have the United States with military bases all around the world, invading and interfering in so many countries around the world that the West tends to believe the United States over China. And over the last week, Israel bombed and invaded 8 countries in 1 week. And this is all supported by the United States, but somehow China is the problem. I just wish the world, well, you referred to this before, David, I just wish the world, especially Australia, would grow up on these sort of issues, because none of this makes any sort of political sense.
Yeah, the current media is never going to accept a Labor government no matter what they do. And in fact, the Labor government, acting like Liberal light recently, hasn't done anything at all to curry major favour with the press. And even if they did, they'd have to get more and more immature, more and more childlike or childish. And I don't know what the point of that, a bit of good press at the expense of good policy, is just ridiculous. Why the government wants the approval of the Herald Sun or the Daily Telegraph, journals that have no great influence anymore. Why not just do good work and let the long-term benefits of that flow through? We're still long-term to the election in political speed, still 2 years away. A lot of good work now and beyond will pay off for the election. You don't actually have to worry too much about the Liberal Party, I don't think. I guess the thing you'd have to worry about is that their factions unite and finally decide they do actually want to be a governing party, because there are winning paths they can take to victory. They're hard and they're difficult, but they're possible. But they require a lot more unity. The printed press is dying. Their online figures are pretty low, which is interesting. I think we've got to get through to the government that there's no point in trying to cozy up to the press, because there's no press to cozy up to. Good news, sure. Have your media people to send things out professionally, definitely, all of that. But don't try and cozy up to them, because it's not going to work. And it's never going to work. So Dan Andrews goes to China and they hammer into Dan Andrews for going to China. Okay. They're allowed to do that, by the way. It's a free country, free speech, all of that. But there's no point in getting upset about it.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
Senator Jacinta Price is back in the headlines, and this time it's for refusing to back her own leader, Susan Lee. And this just continues that toxic influence that Jacinta Price has got within politics. Now, first of all, it was within the Voice to Parliament campaign several years ago. Then she caused problems for Peter Dutton during the last federal election campaign. Then she caused problems for the Country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory. She then defected to the Liberal Party, caused problems for Angus Taylor in the leadership ballot for the Liberal Party. And now she's causing problems for the new leadership of the Liberal Party. So she has been dumped from the front bench of the Liberal Party, and that was to be expected. You can't be on the front bench and not support your leader. But this is a problem that is not likely to disappear anytime soon, David. And all of this started last week when she claimed that the Labor government is favouring and pushing for more immigration from India, based on her claim that Labor's just doing this because the Indian community generally votes for the Labor Party, and that's actually true. I think it's around 60 or 70% of the Indian community that does vote for the Labor Party. And she said that this is the main reason why, or this is the only reason why the Labor government wants to have more immigration from India, even though there's absolutely no evidence to support that. And her claim also resulted in the Indian community being the target of abuse during the right-wing March for Australia events that were recently held. And the Indian community wants an apology from Jacinta Price. This is what the representatives from the community said during the week.
When a single person like this make comments, which is singling out a community, it's not fair.
She has singled out the Indian community. That is a very unfair to us.
If they can make the thing right and get the senator to apologize, of course, there is always a chance to work together.
Still no apology. That's arrogance. That I would not say. I would not use a lighter word for that. You're in public life. If you've done something wrong, apologize.
And this has triggered all sorts of division within the Liberal Party. It's showing a lot of cracks that are being exposed within the party that struggled for unity since its solid election defeat in May this year. And it's obvious that Jacinta Price is trying to position herself as the straight talker, outsider for Sky News, but she's a toxic influence. She's undermining the Liberal Party. She's undermining Susan Lee. And ultimately, she's undermining herself and showing herself to be totally unsuited to politics.
There are those who think that Jacinta Price will be a future Prime Minister. I don't think it's very possible at all. I think part of this comes from a party that wants to have someone they can use. I think there's some who would like to see an Indigenous woman as leader of the Liberal Party and who would like to see that added to the Liberals' list of things they've done for women and things they've done for Indigenous. Now, it's not a terribly long list in the last 30 years, but before that in particular, there were some good things that the Liberal Party did. First female cabinet member in Tame, Lion, first Indigenous senator in Neville Bonner, for example. They haven't had a lot since John Howard. I'm sure I'm missing something.
Oh, come on. They had Warren Mundine.
They had Warren Mundine. That's true. The most unifying figure in Indigenous politics in Australia. Everyone hates him equally, no matter where they stand in politics. But the trouble with Jacinta Price is that she's not very intelligent. After being one of the major forces in wrecking the Voice referendum by saying, I'm Indigenous and I don't think this is a good idea. She never really explained why it wasn't a good idea. She didn't ever contradict any of the obvious lies that they were coming for your schools and for your house and land rights would go round the twist. Talking to people who hadn't engaged a lot with Indigenous policy. At the end of that process, she said, a couple of months after, she said, what we need is an Indigenous voice to Parliament. She didn't quite say it like that, but she wanted an Indigenous body to represent the feelings of Indigenous people to Parliament, which was met with a wide-eyed silence as people said, didn't you just campaign against that very thing? And she tried to explain a way out of it, but of course couldn't. And she was duchessed into the Liberal Party by being given the position of Angus Taylor's putative deputy, which wasn't successful. It went very close, actually. I've seen a couple of numbers analysis that say that if Susan Lee was to stand again, that she might not get the numbers because the numbers she won by were very flexible. They're genuine numbers, but numbers that she's unlikely to keep. And had Taylor run with perhaps a better deputy, he could win. And of course, I think you were the one who pointed it out. How would you be being a person who's given your whole professional and a lot of your personal life to the party to not get the chance to be deputy because they've brought someone in from the National Party who's clearly a stunt candidate? And the other thing too, what Jacinta's done is exposed the massive split in the Liberal Party.
Oh, and maybe that's what the real story is here, David. It's not so much about what Jacinta Price is doing or not doing. It's the factional war that seems to be bubbling below the surface. And Alex Hawke, he used to be the numbers man for Scott Morrison. Now he does the numbers for Susan Lee. That's the way that this process works. And his job within the Liberal Party is to maintain discipline. And there's no question that there was some kind of argument or clash that went on behind the scenes between Alex Hawke and Jacinta Price or staffers or whatever was reported in the media. But this happens every single day of the week and for all political parties. Someone steps out of line and then the whips or the senior leaders within the party tell them in no uncertain terms that they need to sit down and shut up and just do as they're told. Otherwise, they'll lose their job. And most sensible MPs or senators or political aspirants, they will do this. First of all, they're clever enough not to step out of line, but when they do, they just do as they're told. They eat some humble pie and just get on with it. They don't go out to the media and start calling out Alex Hawke or their whips or their senior leaders. They just get on with it. That's how politics works. But it just seems like there's not enough wise heads within the Liberal Party, and Jacinta Price is certainly not one of those wiser heads. And politics is a team game. You can't just sort of be a lone wolf within a political party. You can be an independent, but not within a political party if you want to get ahead. But it seems like that split within the Liberal Party that you've been talking about for some time, David, I think it's about 8 years now, but that might be coming up soon because there's a conservative, libertarian, nobody tells me what to do type of rump of the Liberal Party who are extremist bomb throwers. And then there's the rest of the Liberal Party who are just trying to be a little bit normal. They're the ones who are going out to the Indian community in Harris Park to try and let everyone know that everything will be okay within the Liberal Party. Just vote for us again. And Jacinta Price, she wasn't really trying to be racist or anything like that. So it seems like there's two schisms within the Liberal Party, and I just don't think that they're reconcilable. And these pressure points, they're on the verge of exploding, and it could happen sooner than we think. And when it does happen, I just don't think it's going to be a very pretty sight. Should we be getting our popcorn ready, David?
You can maybe hear it in the background as I prepare it. It's well overdue. And again, it goes to the immaturity. Adults would have sat down in a room, closed the doors, had it out, and worked out in a mature and constructive way. Can we work together? Yes, we can. Okay, these are the compromises that we all have to make and all stick to them. There's that branch of libertarianism that just will not compromise whatsoever. Bunch of children. And that's on the left and the right. I think you can't work with those people. But for reasonable people, they'd have gone into a room, worked it out, worked out the compromises, had a deal, 3 years' time or what have you after the next election or whenever, gone back in, okay, what worked, what didn't. Maybe we can't stay together, maybe we can. If they split amicably, promise each other supply and confidence motions unless things change in the way that independents do. All very good, all friends. Instead, it's going to be nasty. We're going to see all kinds of things happen. It could be that they just start to purge people while trying to keep the party together. I think that the saner heads are going to be ignored and it's going to be a bloodbath. I hope I'm wrong, and I'm happy to say I thought it was going to be a bloodbath, but it wasn't. But given the way that things just happen in the party.
Oh, but David, if there's no bloodbath, who's going to eat the popcorn that you're just cooking up?
I'll still eat it. I'll work it out.
But I just don't think that it's reconcilable. I think that's what the big issue is, that there's just those two schisms. You can't see how they're going to work out or accommodate each other. And normally when the Labor Party is in opposition, there's a number of different factions within the Labor Party. We know all about that, but they tend to organise these things behind closed doors, and they do tend to share in the spoils of defeat when they're in opposition. But the thing is that a lot of this sort of stuff within the Labor Party is done behind closed doors, but within the Liberal Party, it's all out in the open. If there's a problem, they rush to the media. It's a little bit like kindergarten politics. Oh, Alex Hawke, he said some terrible words about me. Like, the thing is that you do this all behind closed doors, but it's all out in the open, and I think that's the biggest problem for them.
It was a problem with the Labor Party convention. It was all done behind closed doors so that the convention, which was meant to be where everything got aired and it was just safe votes, which stifled debate a bit, I think. They've improved on that again since the New South Wales right in particular. But at least there was that maturity of doing the nasty stuff, having those really difficult and awful conversations out of the public eye. And then caucus laws, meaning that you can't comment on them once the decision's been made. The Liberal Party always leaks, and it's always backgrounding, and it's words that to nobody sound loyal, but are meant to sound loyal. Oh, I think we all should stand up and support our leader no matter how inappropriate and ineffectual she is, type stuff. I have no ambition to be Prime Minister, but if I was, and there's a sense in which the Liberal Party has always been this, to the point where perfectly innocuous things can be misinterpreted and careers damaged or destroyed by making some general point that the ego of the leader or one of the cabinet sees as a personal attack. So often it is a personal attack. I'm not that wide-eyed and, you said something nice. But what I mean is that sometimes general political statements or policy statements are seen as an attack when they weren't. And someone loses their seat, or someone doesn't get that promotion, or someone suddenly finds themselves moved down the Senate ticket or what have you. Again, it does happen in Labor, and it happens in the Greens too, but not in the public and reality TV way of doing things. When there's a green scandal, we take a lot of notice because this doesn't often happen. But when it does, it's nasty. It happens a lot in the Liberal Party, and it's happening a lot now. And it's that rupture between the libertarian and the authoritarians, I guess. That's probably not the best way of splitting it, but it rhymes, so I'm sticking with it. And all we can do from here is see what happens. I don't think the career of Jacinta Price has quite ended yet. And I don't think the issue, like having her leave shadow cabinet, I don't think has finished this issue. I think we've still got a few weeks to play out on this, and we'll be here watching it. The popcorn's getting ready.
The iconic Bondi Beach turned into a symbol of division. With flags flying high, the standoff between these two groups quickly escalated. Police did their best as tempers rose.
They don't live here. I live here. They're terrorists. Get them out of here.
We're here to mark Father's Day for the tens of thousands of Palestinian fathers and the tens of thousands of Palestinian children who do not have a father.
The decision to hold a pro-Palestine protest in Sydney's east condemned by Jewish groups as deliberately provocative.
There's no reason why we should not be allowed to walk on the beach.
Provoking a response from the Jewish community in their backyard, trying to bring hatred and anti-Semitism to Australia.
Bondi, as well as every other beach and every other park in this country, belongs to all Australians.
Bondi Beach became the scene of a tense standoff last weekend where a pro-Palestine event, which was organised by Jews against the Occupation 48 and designed as a peaceful, family-friendly event, became the target of angry and extremist Zionist groups. And the event was organised in solidarity with the Sumud Flotilla, which is attempting to break the siege in Gaza. It also marked Father's Day and honoured all the children who have lost parents and parents who have lost children in Gaza. Now, the gathering featured origami boats, there was a paddle out, there were sea shanties, hardly the sign of a violent protest. But it wasn't enough for the right-wing Zionist groups like the Extreme Australian Jewish Association, which announced beforehand that they would confront people at this event and then went on to frame this event as a group of communist troublemakers, calling them terrorists and shouting at all of these people to go back to Lakemba. Now, David, I'm pretty good with my geography, and I can tell you that Bondi Beach is not in Tel Aviv. And last time I looked, it's actually a suburb of Sydney, and it's a public beach. It's open to everyone. It's not a private zone for one political ideology or another, or for one group of people. It's a public space that's part of Sydney, and it's open to anyone who wants to be there. And when extremist groups intimidate families at a beach who are involved in a peaceful event, that should be called out by our political leaders. But instead we see silence, we see pandering and a refusal to condemn any extremist action at all when it takes place against the cause of Palestine. And there's no question that all of these Zionist agitators were the aggressors. They claim that Bondi Beach belongs to the Jewish community, belongs to the Zionists, but they were pretty vile, they were putrid. There were quite a few people there from the Israel Defence Forces, and I think the crowd was maybe around 200 or 300 people. There seemed to be quite a few South African accents there as well. So their actions were totally unacceptable, and it should have been called out by our political leaders.
First thing I should point out, living in the area, go home to Lakemba isn't the insult that it was meant to. They were chanting that at one point, apparently.
Well, I was thinking, great, go back to Lakemba. Lakemba's a great suburb.
It is, yeah. It's got better food than Bondi and cheaper. But it was disgraceful, a peaceful protest. And again, the idea of the protest was to go to somewhere globally iconic, Sydney Harbour Bridge, Bondi Beach. Opera House would be another one, although it's near the bridge, and get the world's attention. All it got was how nasty some of the residents of Bondi are. We've had, 2 years of protest every Sunday in Hyde Park, where there's been, statistically anyway, no arrests. I don't think there's been any arrests, but if there has, there's been one or two over 100 Sundays. We had 350,000 people march across the bridge in difficult circumstances. No arrests. None. Extraordinary. We go to Bondi Beach, the other side turn up, and suddenly there are punches thrown and arrests. Now, I don't know who's at fault and who started it. The press were very quiet on that. That suggests maybe who started it.
Well, you did have the Australian Jewish Association announcing beforehand that they were going to confront people. So I'd say that they were the ones behind this.
Yeah. And to try, and it was just as wrong when Anglo people tried it with Cronulla Beach. This is our beach, go home, to people from Canterbury Bankstown area, allegedly. How many of them were from Canterbury Bankstown, I don't know. And then we had the riots. The riots that should have seen Alan Jones put into jail, by the way. Took him a few more years to be thrown out of influence. But it's wrong on Bondi, it's wrong at Cronulla, it's wrong at Manly, it's wrong at DY, it's wrong at whatever beach you care to mention. Beaches are public areas. If you protest, sure, be noisy, but don't be destructive and don't be obstructive to people who aren't in your zone. If someone's swimming at the other end of the beach, let them swim. But to come up and say this is our place when it's clearly not your place exclusively shows a level of entitlement that has no place in public discourse. Now, if they'd gone to somebody's house and had breached the fence and were protesting on private property, sure, okay, yeah, that's a problem and that's your place. But that's not Bondi Beach or any beach in Australia. You should be able to go there with the reasonable expectation that you won't be hurt. Given that it's a beach, things can happen. People get swept out and trip on the rocks and stuff. But you shouldn't be hurt by other people. The anti-Palestine faction did themselves no favours. That's absolutely true. Showed themselves yet again to be mindless thugs who don't have an argument and so are trying to hide that lack of argument through violence.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
Lachlan Murdoch has taken control of News Corporation, and that's the business that was built up by Rupert Murdoch and before him Keith Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch, without a question, is the most cancerous influence on the politics of the United States, of the politics of Britain, and of the politics in Australia. And while it's good that at least that influence has been diminished, while he's still alive, that influence will be there. And there have been some concerns that Lachlan Murdoch is even more right-wing and even more extreme than Rupert Murdoch. But the point is that he's not Rupert Murdoch. That's the biggest point. There was a $1 billion payout to his far more progressive siblings, and that has cleared the way for Lachlan Murdoch to take over News Corporation. And he's presenting himself as the protector of the conservative voice in the English-speaking world. Yet his record overall is just littered with business failures. There was that joint venture that he had with James Packer and Jody Rich, and that was a complete failure of OneTel in the late 1990s, and that left debts of $1 billion. There was also the failure of the Super League rugby venture. That lost around $550 million. And David, these losses were some time ago, and they're not small amounts. So $1.5 billion in these two business ventures 20 years ago or 25 years ago. It's a lot of money now, but it would have been even a lot more money 25 years ago. And Lachlan Murdoch just doesn't seem to have that cutthroat business instincts or political clout that made Rupert Murdoch such a feared operator. And he's indicated that he'll keep the circus going on. Sky After Dark's clown show, the endless conservative spin of The Australian, the endless rubbish published in the tabloids that keep shouting at the clouds and try to pick fights in imaginary culture wars. But the truth is, David, that these outlets were Rupert Murdoch's vanity projects. They were instruments of political control and power, not so much of profit. And without Rupert Murdoch around, most of this has lost its purpose. And News Corporation will still survive through its sports services, its streaming and entertainment content. But the days of the Murdoch media shaping and forming governments is ending. That's gone. And Lachlan Murdoch is pretty much presiding over the slow decline of a media empire.
There's an axiom that the grandfather makes the fortune, the son builds the fortune, and the grandson loses the fortune. And I put that in sexist terms because that's mostly been the way it's been. And while there are no doubt exceptions to the rule, in Australia we've seen the three great media families, and I use great in terms of size, not necessarily in terms of character, the Fairfaxes, the Packers and the Murdochs, where the grandfathers did very well, built them up. John Fairfax got the Sydney Morning Herald and then later The Age to prominence. His son built them into organs of some influence and made a lot of money. And then it was the grandson or the grandchildren who lost it all, pretty much. You had Sir Frank Packer, who was in many ways a giant of a man, in many ways a pygmy of a man, who built Channel 9 in particular into a broadcast juggernaut. And then Kerry built it even further. Kerry became Australia's first billionaire and was a mixture of genius businessman, total thug, absolute good of heart generosity, and callous bastard all at once, a mixture of contradictions. And then Kerry dies and James takes over, and for whatever reason, and there's a mixture of what we might call understandable reasons and a mixture of character failings. It's still a big company, but it's nowhere near where it was. And finally, we have Rupert. Keith Murdoch didn't want to hand the business over to Rupert, but died too soon and couldn't stop it. Rupert turned out to be a genius businessman. Whether for good or evil is a debate for another day, although I think most of our listeners would probably fall on the latter side, as we would. Now, Rupert is hampered by the fact that he's had 7 or 8 children through 3 or 4 different wives. But the business was being argued essentially between Lachlan and James. The 3 oldest children, or the 4 oldest children, battled it out in court. And it turns out that Lachlan gets control. Whereas Rupert allayed the doubts about his intelligence, and Lachlan has not impressed. And it may be that he rises to the occasion and somehow brings print media back. As you mentioned, Wantel suggested that neither James Packer or Lachlan Murdoch really had the business nous, the ruthlessness, the strategic skills, and the sheer bravado of their fathers. There's a slight sense in which I admire elements of Kerry Packer, having worked in television. I don't think I would have liked him very much, and I certainly disagreed with a lot of what he did and said. But he had a genius about him that wasn't just media people trying to ingratiate themselves to him. For a man who'd lived a life of privilege, he knew what working class people wanted to see, which is a skill that was almost instinctive. Rupert was much more about riling people up, getting them angry, showing that it's a zero-sum game, and if they're getting something, you're not getting anything, which is a form of genius, but a much less defensible character. If there are good points, you got to bring them up. Rupert Murdoch had no good points, except an extreme ruthlessness to survive and to succeed as best as he can, and to hold as much influence as he can. And at 94 still going, I suppose that's something that should be noted.
Celebrating Indigenous way, a means to survive, for which Noongar strive, our culture on display, celebrating Indigenous way.
This will reset the relationship between First Peoples and government. This will create a body that will enact real, practical change for First Peoples in our state.
It requires it by law.
These are the key tenets to closing the gap. It's what's been missing.
And anything that works for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will work for other Australians, and particularly minority groups.
The treaty won't take anything away from anyone. It's about building up, not tearing down. It's about a partnership.
This empowerment that the treaty bill will give us, it's heart-lifting.
And giving everyone a better future. I commend the bill to the House.
Victoria has just made history, becoming the first parliament in Australia to introduce treaty legislation with Indigenous people. And the main part of the treaty is Gulong Wal, which is a democratically elected body that needs to be consulted on laws and policies that affect Indigenous communities. And it's not just symbolic. The treaty process will also include a truth-telling process and the inclusion of more Indigenous history within the high school curriculum. And it creates an independent accountability mechanism that's linked directly to the Closing the Gap agreement. And this is exactly the kind of model Anthony Albanese should have pursued instead of the disastrous Voice of Parliament referendum in 2023. Victoria has essentially delivered a Voice of Parliament, but without a national divisive referendum that the opposition could weaponise. And that's exactly what happened back in 2023. And of course, Victoria's leader of the Liberal Party, Brad Batten, says that he'd rather see money spent directly on services rather than on a treaty. Well, it doesn't really matter what you say now because this is all happening. But the fact is that the legislation is in place, it's moving forward, and it now sets a blueprint that can be used by the rest of the country. And if other states and territories follow, well, this could be the start of a genuine national shift in how Australia recognises and works with Indigenous people.
Apparently New South Wales has started the process too. Nice thing about a treaty is it's very hard to repeal them because it's two parties who have to repeal them. So you either break it, which is bad, or you're stuck with it. And one of the arguments that the Liberal Party had with the Voice campaign is, it should just be legislation. And of course, legislation can be repealed. It can be modified. It can be changed. That's why Labor went for the constitutional change. And they should have won it. They made many mistakes. And they underestimated the inherent, I'll call it caution. But a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah, but I also think that this is what a lot of people were saying at the time, that this is the better pathway towards achieving true reconciliation and also achieving a treaty. You go through this sort of process where you're involving the government, which is representative of the people, and then you've got an Indigenous group of people and they negotiate the treaty. That's the way that it should have happened rather than this divisive process through a Voice of Parliament, which was just, you could spot it from a mile away, I guess, in hindsight, that this was not going to work. And this should have been a better way to achieve that.
Yeah, at the time, I actually underestimated the power of fear, thinking that we'd gone past that small-minded John Howard demonising of the other, but we hadn't yet. And so I think that having a treaty in Victoria, hopefully one in New South Wales, I will say nice things about the Minns government if they bring a good treaty through, because it's the fair thing to do. I think we need to be hopeful that this will change things. Now, you're going to get the anti-Indigenous mob emboldened by the far right, who then get emboldened by the centre, claiming that this will be the end of it. We'll all be ruined, said Hanrahan. But hopefully, yeah, New South Wales will lead to South Australia. South Australia will lead to Western Australia. Western Australia will lead to Tasmania. Tasmania will lead to Queensland, because I think that's the order it'll happen in. And with all the states, and I guess the Northern Territory and the territories doing one, we could perhaps do a federal one, which part of which might include a voice to Parliament that doesn't have to go to referendum and is hammered into a binding treaty that governments would be very loath to break or renegotiate. So let's hope that it goes that way and we get to where we should have been in 2023. It'll take till 2033 at least, but at least we're hopefully walking in the right direction.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.